Trump leads Harris by 1.2% nationwide, despite having lost the popular vote 4 years ago to Joe Biden by a 4.5% margin. This means that this year, Trump is performing 5.7% better than he did in the last election. And so in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the 2024 electoral map if Trump does indeed swing the country 5.7% to the right and wins the popular vote by 1.2%. This would amount to a massive landslide victory for the former president. Donald Trump would be the first Republican to win the popular vote since 2004 and only the second since 1988. We're going to start off by filling in the solid states for both candidates, and we're going to begin with the safe blue states for Harris. These are states she's going to win by at least a 12-point margin. On the West Coast, we have both Washington and California, with the notable exception of Oregon. Oregon is a state that can get competitive, and we'll go over this a little bit later. Hawaii is also going to be solid blue, and so will many of the traditionally safe Democratic northeastern states. We have Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, Delaware, Maryland, the District of Columbia, and the 1st District of Maine. And so with all the solid states filled in for Vice President Harris, she currently is at 140 electoral votes. As for Trump, he is going to win the states of Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, North and South Dakota, nearly all of Nebraska, as well as Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana, South Carolina, and Alaska. These are all states he's won by at least 12 points in one of the last 2 elections. However, in this scenario, he's also going to carry Iowa, Ohio, and the 2nd District of Maine by at least a safe margin. And so the way we're calculating this is taking the 2020 map and adjusting it with a 5.7% shift in favor of Donald Trump. So a state like Iowa that Trump carried by 8.2%, that margin is going to go up to 13.9. In the 2nd District, it's going to go from 7.4 all the way up to nearly 13. And so basically, we're going to see a lot more of these safe red states, while many states that Biden carried by 12 points last time are not going to be as safe for the vice president. And so with these solid states now filled in for both candidates, Trump leads 149 to Harris's 140. We're now going to fill in the likely states for both candidates, starting off with the likely blue states. And of course, Kamala Harris, like I mentioned before, she is still going to win in Oregon. The margin is just not going to be safe. Joe Biden carried the state by 16 points. The margin is going to go down to around 10 points for Kamala Harris if she loses the popular vote by 1.2%. Now, Oregon is a state that can get surprisingly competitive. Hillary Clinton only carried it by a likely margin in 2016, and on top of that, in 2022, the governor's election in Oregon went down to a single-digit margin. Democrat Tina Kotek was barely elected governor of the state. We also have Colorado, 10 electoral votes. Joe Biden actually did very well in 2020, winning it by nearly 14 points. The margin this time, it's going to fall into that single-digit range once again with the adjustment we're going to make. And New Mexico will also be likely, but it's just barely going to be above a 5-point margin. Joe Biden carried the state by 10.8%. You adjust it to the right by 5.7, and you get a 5.1% margin. So New Mexico, it's undoubtedly going to be significantly more competitive than it was last time, especially as the Hispanic vote continues to shift to the right. Continuing as we move east, we have Illinois, 19 electoral votes, a state that the last 3 Democrats have won by the exact same margin. Barack Obama by 16.9 in 2012, Hillary Clinton by 17.1 in 2016, and then Joe Biden 17% in 2020. Kamala Harris, if she loses the popular vote, that margin is going to go down to 11.3%, which will make it only likely. And the final likely blue state on this map, I think it's pretty obvious what it's going to be, and of course that is the state of New Jersey, 14 electoral votes, a state that Democrats would probably win by a likely margin anyways, even if Kamala Harris somehow won the popular vote. Democrats are not popular in New Jersey right now. We have a very competitive Senate race to replace Bob Menendez, who has only recently agreed to resign after multiple convictions of bribery. He really has lost the trust that voters had in Democrats in New Jersey, and it will be difficult for Democrats to win those voters back. And the election in November is only in less than 3 months, so it's pretty unlikely that Democrats are going to do too well in New Jersey, considering the poor performance of Senator Menendez throughout his term. Basically accepted too many bribes, and so obviously that is going to be a huge issue for Democrats, and it will prevent Harris from winning the state by 12 points. Before we continue, only 11% of you guys are actually subscribed, so please take the time to subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November, and follow me on Twitter for daily political updates, link in the description below. We're now going to fill in the likely red states on this map, beginning with two of the most obvious ones, and they're going to be huge prizes for the former president. We, of course, have Texas and Florida, two states that Trump carried by around 3 to 5 points last time. Texas, the margin was 5.6. This time, it's going to be double digits. It's going to be very close to being a solid margin, but just not quite. And Florida, Trump is going to win by nearly 10 points. The margin is going to jump all the way up to 9%. Florida is a state that Trump did very well in the last election, winning it by nearly 3 times the margin he won it by 4 years prior. And just in 2012, as recently as 12 years ago, the Sunshine State was the most competitive state in the entire country. Today, Florida is a red state, and even if Kamala Harris wins the popular vote, Florida is still going to go to Trump by a likely margin, and an 8 to 9 point margin is definitely very much possible. Texas as well, Trump is probably going to win by nearly 10 points no matter what happens. So in both of these states, a combined 70 electoral votes. They're very influential, and Trump has basically locked them up for this election. Democrats thought they could win Texas. They put hundreds of millions of dollars into advertising in Florida in 2020. It all amounted to nothing, and in 2024 they're probably not even going to try, simply because of how much redder these two states have gotten over the last 4 years. In the likely red category, we also have North Carolina, a state that Trump carried by 1.3% last time. You add on that 5.7% adjustment, and Trump is on track to winning the state by nearly 7 points. It's going to be a pretty easy victory for the former president. He carried the state by 3 points in 2016, and North Carolina generally is a red state. The last time I voted blue was 2008, and before that, you would have to go all the way back to 1976 and the election of Jimmy Carter. So the state of North Carolina is a red state. It has been competitive in the last few election cycles, but if Trump wins the popular vote, there's no way Kamala Harris can secure victory in the Tar Heel state. We also have neighboring Georgia. Yes, Georgia went to Joe Biden in the last election, but the margin was so small that it's almost guaranteed that Trump is going to win it back, just by the fact that all he has to do is outperform his 2020 margin by 0.24%. That is not too hard to do. And so as a result, if he wins the popular vote, and if he swings the country to the right by 5.7%, he is going to win Georgia by just over 5 points. The state is going to be likely Republican. We also have Arizona. I mean, very similar to what we saw in Georgia. Joe Biden carried it by just over 1/4 of a percentage point. And I mean, again, it just would not be very difficult for Trump to win back state. He lost by such a narrow margin. There isn't really anyone that expects Kamala Harris to perform better than Joe Biden did in the last election, because he really did do well. If you look at states like New York, Colorado, Illinois, Joe Biden was a strong performer in the last election. He won Minnesota by 7 points, New Hampshire by 7.4. In 2016, these two states went down to the wire. So Kamala Harris, there's no way she's going to do better than Biden, and it's very unlikely, no matter what happens, that she's going to hold on to states like Arizona and Georgia that went to the incumbent president so narrowly. So Arizona will also just barely be a likely red state in this scenario. And the final likely state on our map is Wisconsin. This is a must-win state for Kamala Harris, but considering the fact that Biden won it by just 0.63%, it could very well flip in favor of Trump. If Trump is able to push the nation 5 points to the right, he would win Wisconsin by 5.07%, which would be enough to make the state likely Republican. It's probably going to be closer than that in reality, but still, you get the message here. Trump would win pretty easily. He would get to 270 electoral votes with just solid and likely states. if he was able to win the popular vote by 1.2%. Of course, you wouldn't see an exact 5-point shift in every state, but generally you would see a pretty consistent shift in favor of Trump, especially in many of those competitive states. And so we're now going to get into the lean states. These states will be decided by margins between 1 and 5 percentage points. Starting off in Minnesota, a state that Kamala Harris cannot lose. If she loses Minnesota, the election's over. You can basically go home. Donald Trump is elected the next president. Thankfully for her, though, even if she loses the popular vote, she would still win Minnesota by just over 1 to 2 percentage points. 7.1% was Biden's margin in 2020. You would get around a 1-point margin if the country swings to the right by nearly 6 points. Joe Biden did do well, but Hillary Clinton, not so well in 2016. 1.5% was the margin. So there are some doubts as to whether or not Democrats can hold on to Minnesota for much longer. But as of right now, it does seem Harrison is in a relatively favorable position. If Biden had stayed in the race, he probably would have lost the state. We also have New Hampshire, a state that went down to the wire in 2016. Hillary Clinton won it by less than half a percentage point. That could happen again, but Joe Biden did carry the state by 7.4%, and so applying our shift of 5.7%, the Granite State is going to be lean Democratic in this scenario. Up in Maine, not a state that's too relevant electorally, but it's also going to be lean blue. Joe Biden carried it by 9 points in 2020. The margin's going to be around 4 points if Kamala Harris loses the popular vote. And the final lean blue state on our map is Virginia. The Commonwealth of Virginia voted for Biden by a double-digit margin in 2020. He won it by 10 points. If Kamala Harris loses the popular vote by 1.2%, Donald Trump would be on track to pushing the state back into lean territory, where it was when Hillary Clinton won in 2016, 5.3%. We're going to see a margin somewhere in that range. We now have just 3 states and 1 district. We're going to start off with the most obvious lean state for Trump, and that is Nevada. Despite Trump having never won the state in either 2016 or 2020, he lost it by 2.4% both times. And the silver state, if you look at polls between Harris and Trump, or if you look at the polls between Biden and Trump, they both said the same thing: Trump was on track to win. And so as of right now, even if Trump loses the popular vote, he would probably still win in Nevada. We also have Michigan, 15 electoral votes, a state that Biden won by a similar margin last time, 2.8%. The margin would swing to around a 3-point victory for Donald Trump if he wins the popular vote. And we also have the Keystone State of Pennsylvania, 19 electoral votes. This is a big state, a state that Kamala Harris cannot lose under any circumstances. And if Trump wins the popular vote, you can see just how easily he is going to grab every single swing state. Pennsylvania voted for Biden by 1.2%. The state would be nearly likely for Donald Trump if he swings the country by 6 points to the right. We have just one more district, and it's the only tilt state or district on the entire map. Joe Biden carried the 2nd district of Nebraska by 6.6%. Kamala Harris would win it by 0.9% if we apply the 5.7% swing. So basically, if Trump wins the popular vote by 1.2% this November, which would constitute, again, a 5.7% swing to the right from the 2020 election margin, Donald Trump would win 312 electoral votes, and he would easily get the swing states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona. He would win the election with only the solid and likely states, and Kamala Harris would be the worst performing Democrat in any presidential election since 1988. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November, and join my Discord server, link in the description below.